Hey everyone, for today's video we're going to be learning how to solve quadratic equations. So quadratic means that you have a term that is x squared, something that's raised to the second power. It could be something like this, it could be a trinomial, but just once you see that second power, you know it's a quadratic. Now you guys have gotten familiar with solving linear equations, so solving an equation for any single variable. This is going to be similar, but since it has an x squared term, we're going to have to take into account what we learned about factoring and try to incorporate that. So we're just going to go through a few examples and try to get an introduction and get our feet wet with this. So the first question says solve 6x squared minus 42 equals 0 for the exact value of x. Since our variable that we're solving for is x, a good idea would be to get our variable alone. So if I want to get my x squared term alone, my first step is going to be to add 42 to both sides of the equation. Okay, this will cancel out. I'll be left with 6x squared equals 42. Now you want to get your x squared term alone. So right now 6 is being multiplied by x squared. The way to undo multiplication would be division. So I'm going to divide by 6 on both sides. 6 will cancel. And then I'm going to go ahead and do 42 divided by 6, which is 7. Now, in order to get rid of something that is squared, any variable, x squared, y squared, a squared, the way you undo a term being squared is by taking the square root. Okay? Just like you guys saw before, x times x gives you x squared. X times itself is x squared, so that's why the square root of x squared is x. However, when you take the square root of a number, remember you can have a positive root or a negative root. Okay, so for instance, if you wanted the square root of 4, that would be 2 times 2 gives you 4, but also negative 2 times negative 2 gives you 4. So you have two possible solutions. So since you can't take the square root of 7 and it's not nice, and it says exact roots, one answer is going to be radical 7, positive, and one answer is going to be negative radical 7. Okay, if you can't take the square root nicely, just leave your answer as a square root. Solve 5x squared equals 180 algebraically. So already one step has been taken care of for us. Our number term has been moved to the other side of the equation. So next, to get x squared alone, I'm going to divide by 5. This will cancel. Then I'm left with x squared equals, and we're going to do 180 divided by 5, which is 36. Once again, to get rid of that x squared term, I'm going to take the square root of both sides. The square root of 36 is nice. It's just 6, because 6 times 6 is 36. But remember again, we also need the negative root, because negative 6 times negative 6 is 36. So one answer will be 6, and one answer will be negative 6. Anytime you take the square root, you want to have a positive and a negative solution. Solve x squared minus 8x minus 9 equals 0 algebraically. So for this problem, it's slightly different than the other two because this is a trinomial. Okay, so over here, since we were missing that b term, the term that just has an x with it, we were able to just get x squared alone and solve. While over here, we have an x squared term and we have an x term. These are not like terms, so we can't combine them. So the only way to solve an equation that has a trinomial is by factoring. So for trinomial, you want to think of factoring for now. Down the line, we're going to learn about a couple other methods in case the trinomial you're given isn't factorable. But right now, you guys are only going to be exposed to factorable equations. So again, I needed to multiply to negative 9, but add to negative 8. Okay, so I'm going to be thinking of negative 9 times 1, that's negative 9, and negative 9 plus 1 would be negative 8. The negative had to go with the larger term because it's summing to a negative. So when this factors, it's going to be x minus 9, x plus 1 equals 0. Now when you want to solve for x, the way you go about it when you have a problem that you factor is you set each of these equal to 0. So one solution is x minus 9 equals 0, and one solution is x plus 1 equals 0. To get x alone here, I'm going to add 9 to both sides. So x is 9. To get x alone here, I'm going to subtract 1 from both sides. So x is negative 1. Solve the equation 4x squared minus 12x equals 7 algebraically for x. Again, this problem is a trinomial. We have an x squared term, an x term, and a number term. So we need to do some sort of factoring. For any problem that involves factoring, it must be equal to 0 to factor, okay? So over here, I couldn't solve this problem until it equaled 0. This time you're lucky, it was already given to you equaling 0. And this problem, a trinomial must equal 0 to solve. So my first step is I'm going to move this 7 to the other side. These are not like terms. These are not like terms. They don't combine. It just gets rewritten as a trinomial. So it becomes 4x squared minus 12x minus 7 equals 0. Okay, all I did was move the 7 term to the other side, but to move it over, I need to do the opposite operation. Now I want to think about factoring. I can't pull out a 4 because 4 can't be divided into 7. So this is again one of those A times C problems. So I'm going to do 4 times negative 7, and that's going to leave us with negative 28. But they need to add to negative 12. So if I think about 14 times 2, I would want the 14 to be negative because it needs to sum to a negative number. Okay, so now I'm going to write these terms, negative 14 and 2, in place for the 12x. Okay, so if I have 4x squared minus 14x plus 2x minus 7 equals 0. All right, I want to just show you guys something. The order in which I write these two terms doesn't matter, okay? But it may be a little bit harder for you when you're thinking about factoring these two because 2 and 7 don't have anything in common. You can pull out a 1, but if you wanted, I can also rewrite this and put the 2x and put the 14x after. Because remember, whether it's negative 14 plus 2 or 2 minus 14, that's still negative 12. So I just rewrote it so factoring will be a little bit more convenient for us. So now I'm going to do factor by grouping. I can pull out a 2x in common from both. 2x times 2x will be 4x squared. 2x times 1 will be 2x. For these two terms, what I have in common is a 7. Always pull out the negative with it. Negative 7 times 2x will be negative 14x. Negative 7 times positive 1 will be negative 7. This still equals 0. I know I did it right because this is repeated. So now I'm going to have 2x minus 7, parentheses 2x plus 1 equals 0. Again, to solve for x, you want to set both factors equal to 0. So 2x minus 7 equals 0, and 2x plus 1 equals 0. I want to get x alone in this equation, so I'm going to add 7 to both sides. 2x would equal 7. Now to get x alone, I'm going to divide by 2. So x is 7 over 2. Over here, to get x alone, I'm going to subtract 1 from both sides. 2x equals negative 1. To get x alone, I'm going to divide by 2. X equals negative 1/2. So our solutions are 7 over 2 and negative 1/2. You can write your answers as a decimal. That's perfectly fine. All right, this last problem is making it a little bit more complicated. I'm just going to rewrite it because I got a lot of math going on, and I'm just going to show you guys how we would go about it. So my problem is y minus 3 squared equals 4y minus 12. So anytime you have two binomials being multiplied, or you have a term that's being squared and it's binomial, you should make the box and factor this out. Okay? So I'm going to have y and minus 3, y, and minus 3. And I'm going to go ahead and make my box and multiply this out. Y times y, this is like y to the first and y to the first. This would be y squared. Y times negative 3, negative 3y. Negative 3 times y, negative 3y. Negative 3 times negative 3, 9. So I'm going to write all this in place for the y minus 3 squared. So I have y squared minus 3y minus 3y plus 9 equals 4y minus 12. On this side, I want to always combine like terms first. These are like. Negative 3y minus 3y is negative 6y. I'm going to bring everything else down. This is a quadratic. We have a y squared term. Whenever you have a quadratic, it must be equal to 0 to solve if it's a trinomial. Okay? So first, before I get 0 on this side, I want to combine like terms. I'm going to move the 4y over. I'm going to write it under this term because those are the ones that are like. This is gone because I'm moving it over. Negative 6y minus 4y, I'm going to be left with negative 10y. Bringing everything else down. I want to move the negative 12 over, so I'm going to add 12. These are like. Y squared minus 10y gets brought down. 9 plus 12 is 21. Now that this is equal to 0, I can factor. It has to multiply to 21, but it has to add to negative 10. So my factors I'm going to look at are 7 times 3. But since I wanted to add to a negative, both of my terms will be negative. Because a negative times a negative is a positive 21. And a negative plus a negative will sum to a negative. So I'm going to have y minus 7 and y minus 3 equals 0. Then I'm going to set both terms equal to 0. So y minus 7 equals 0. Y minus 3 equals 0. You would add 7 to both sides, so y would be 7. Remember, it's always the opposite sign of what you factored. You would add 3 to both sides, and y would be 3. Alright, I hope this introduction to factoring with quadratics and solving these equations was helpful, and we're going to look at some more in our next video. Bye, guys.